We continue now at the top of Daf Gimel Amud Aleph and Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 3a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the ordering of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah at first tells us about the concept of Kinuye Nedarim, which is when you use substitute terms. Instead of using the word carbon, for example, you use the word konam. And the Mishnah says that that is considered effective when you make the neder in that fashion. And then there was a part missing in the Mishnah, the Gemara says, and it should have talked about the idea of yados of nedarim. That's when you say a partial phrase. And then the Mishnah actually does go on to explain the concept of yados of nedarim. And the Gemara had asked, why would you first talk about kinuyim, then you would mention yados, and then you would explain yados? Shouldn't you go back and explain kinuyim first? And so the Gemara on the previous summit was going back and forth in terms of whether the Mishnah chooses to explain the second thing first, the thing that was just mentioned, or does the Mishnah always like to go in order and explain the first thing first? And the Gemara brought various examples in different directions. There was no clear formulation that the Mishnah uses. And so the Gemara now says, Ela lav dafka, rather the whole thing is lav dafka. Zimnin mefaresh ahud the pasach bereisha. Sometimes the Mishnah will explain the thing that it opened with first. Zimnin ahud the salik mefaresh bereisha. And sometimes the Mishnah will explain the thing that it just finished dealing with first, and there's no real rhyme or reason to deciding which one will be explained. And the Gemara continues, Viba Yisayim, and if you want, we could say another explanation for the Mishnah. Yados Aidi Da'asyon Midrasha. Could be that when it comes to Yados, again, when you say the neder, but you only say it part of the phrase of the neder, so that's really learned out from a drasha, so therefore, Mefarish Lahon Bereisha, that's why that's explained first. Because it's learned from a drasha, so therefore we want to explain it first. And the Gemara says, V'liftach Hadin Bereisha, and so the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, so why doesn't the whole Mishnah start with Yados? Why does the Mishnah start with Kinuyim, and then talk about yados, and then explain yados? And the Gemara explains as follows: Miftach pasach bechinuyin do raisa bereisha. Since kinuyin, that's do raisa, so we start with that in the reisha. That's the first thing we talk about. V'hader mefaresh yados to asyon lemidrasha. Then we explain yados because that's something that's learned out from a drasha. And then again, so that's why we're going to start off when we talk about it. We talk about kinuyin first, but in terms of explanation, we want to explain the yados first. But the Gemara says, this whole explanation is only good according to the one who says that kinuyim is just the way that the non-Jews would talk. But if you're going to go according to the one who says that the Chachamim actually created these kinuyim, so then that's also something that's learned from the Chachamim. So what answer can you give over here? You can't say that Yados is something from a drasha and therefore it goes first, because when it comes to the kinuyim also, it's something that the Chachamim formulated, so that has just as much reason for that to go first. Rashi over here explains, Kinuyin Lashon Nachrim, again this is Mefarish, it's attributed to Rashi, but it may not be Rashi. The Mefarish explains, Kinuyin Lashon Nachrim, Devahani Lashonos, Nidrei Nachrim, Kekonim, Konech, Kones, all of these languages, Sheyesh Lashon Shekaron LeKarban Konim. In other words, it was something that the non-Jews, they would call a carbon, these various terms. Yesh Lashon Shekaron LeKarban Konech V'chein Ashar. There were different languages and they called carbon by different words. So according to that, so Kachashiv Lehu V'adin L'chal Lashon HaNoder Adam Mechayev V'adikam Manu Chacham Hani L'shonos Mishum De Bahani L'shonos Bekiyan. These were just some of the languages that the non-Jews used. It was just terminologies that were used for carbon, and therefore it really is all part of the Doraisa Halacha. You're really saying carbon, just in a different language. The Torah simply says any language that you use, it doesn't matter what foreign language, it's going to be a neder. So that all comes from the Torah. That's not from the Chachamim. It's not from a drasha, etc. But according to Reish Lakish, who says that these are languages that were formulated by the Chachamim, these terms, the Chachamim takinu hani lashonos lios noder, but the Chachamim said to use these terms purposely. So Michael Memer, so then how are you going to explain the Mishnah? Yados aidi da'asin midrasha. How could you say that yados come from a drasha, so they should go first? Hatarvayu ben yados ben kinuin midrasha asyan. Midrabanan, the yados and the kinuin really all are basically a drasha, because even the kinuin are something formulated by the Rabbanan. And so the Gemara answers, Mikotani yados, but is yados really there at the beginning of the Mishnah? It's not even really written there. We inserted it there. The Mishnah explains yados at the end of the Mishnah, but it never has an opening line about yados anywhere. It's really there were words missing in the Mishnah. Chisuri kamechsar, you said that there were words missing. So akdim nami. So if that's the case, let's simply put in the beginning of the Mishnah, instead of saying it's the second line in the Mishnah, let's say the Mishnah does open with yados. Let's put it in the beginning. Vitani yados, kol yados nedarim kinedarim, the Mishnah should read as follows. It should be all yados of nedarim are like nedarim. V'chol kinuyei nedarim kinedarim, and all kinuyei nedarim are like nedarim. Kinuyim now goes second according to this reading, and according to this, the Mishnah will simply go in order. Ve'elu hein yados, and these are what yados are. Ha'omer l'chaveiro, somebody says to his friend, etc. Ve'elu hein kinuyin, and the following are kinuyin, konem, konech, and kones. And the Gemara continues, V'yados hecha ksiv, so where is yados found in the Psukim? What is the drasha? And the Gemara says, Ishki yafli lindor neder nazir lahazir laHashem. The Pasuk talks about a person who makes a neder to become a nazir. B'tanyan, we learned in a brayso, nazir lahazir, the language of the Pasuk is nazir lahazir. Lasos kinuye nazirus kinazirus. This teaches us that the kinuyim, the substitute languages of nazirus, are like nazirus. Now the Ran says we should actually take this line out of the Gemara because kinuyim is not learned from a drasha. V'yados Nazirus Nazirus, but this pasuk again, it does teach us that the yados of Nazirus are like Nazirus. Again, the partial phrase is going to be treated like the full phrase. Ein li'ela ben Nazirus. I only know this is true by Nazirus. Ben Nedarim minayin. How do we know this is true by Nedarim? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Ish ki yafli lindor neder nazir lahazir laHashem makish Nazirus leNedarim. In this pasuk, we put the word neder next to the word nazir to make a comparison between Nazirus and Nedarim, uNedarim leNazirus, and the other direction as well, Nedarim to Nazirus. Ma Nazirus asabo yados Nazirus kinazirus. Just like by Nazirus, the partial phrase is considered like the full phrase. Af Nedarim asabahem yados Nedarim kinedarim. So too by Nedarim, the same thing is true. The partial phrase is like the full phrase. And the other direction we learn as follows: Uma Nedarim over bebal yachil ubebal ta'acher. Just like by Nedarim, a person, if he doesn't fulfill the neder, or if a person delays the neder, he can violate the neder. Af Nazirus, so too when it comes to Nazirus, over bebal yachil ubebal ta'acher, if a person doesn't fulfill it or a person delays it, it can be a violation of a prohibition. And furthermore, the Gemara says, Uma Nedarim ha'av mefer nidrei bito. Just like by a neder, the father can annul the vows of his daughter. Ubal mefer nidrei ishto, and the husband can annul the vows of his wife. Af Nazirus, the same is true by Nazirus. Ha'av mefer Nazirus bito, the father can annul the Nazirus of his daughter. Ubal mefer Nazirus ishto, and a husband can annul the Nazirus of his wife. And the Gemara continues, Ma'ishna gabi Nazirus dechsiv nazir lahazir. What's the difference that by Nazirus you're saying there's a drush over here to teach us the yados, because it says nazir lahazir. But Nedarim nami yoksiv lindor neder. By Nedarim also, it says lindor neder. We should be able to learn it out directly. We don't need to learn it out from nazir. V'kesha lamali. What do we even need the hekesh for between nazir and neder? And the Gemara says, "Ikos of neder lindor kidechsiv nazir lahazir kedukamer." If the language by neder would be exactly the same as by nazir, in other words, it would say neder lindor just like it says nazir lahazir, then you're right. Lo tzarech hakesha, you wouldn't need the hekesh. But hashad dechsiv lindor neder. But now that it just says the language of lindor neder to make this oath, so dibra Torah koloshin b'nei adam. That's just the normal way that people talk, and the Torah will sometimes express itself in the way that people talk. And the Gemara says, Hanichol aman de islay dibra Torah koloshin b'nei adam. That answer is good according to the one who says that the Torah speaks according to the language of man. Elalaman de leslay dibra Torah koloshin b'nei adam. But according to the one who does not hold that the Torah speaks in the language of man, Hai lindor neder my avidle. So what are you going to do again with lindor neder? That seems to be an extra phrase. And the Gemara answers, according to the one who does not hold dibra Torah koloshin b'nei adam, dorish lei lasos yados nedarim kinedarim. You're right. The phrase of lindor neder will be used to say that yados of nedarim are like nedarim. Umakish nazirus lenedarim, and not only that, we'll compare nazirus to nedarim, and we're actually going to learn nazirus from nedarim. Just like by nedarim yados nedarim are like nedarim, so too by nazirus yados of nazirus are like nazirus. And what about nazir lahazir? What's that used for? So darish lei, that's going to be darshan melami to teach us, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Gimel Amud Beis.